The Lions are going to be one of the teams dealing with the most pressure going into this upcoming season because they're right there in terms of getting over the hump. We saw 2 years ago they had the Niners on the rope, but they had a second half collapse that ultimately cost them a chance of reaching the Super Bowl. And then just last season, they were one of the overwhelming favorites to come out of the NFC, and they wet the bed in the divisional round against an up and coming Washington Commanders team. And now they enter this season as one of the favorites, regardless of how much better the NFC has gotten better. We've seen the Rams add more pieces. Hell, we can't count out the Commanders again. And then obviously the Eagles are the reigning defending champions. But outside of the overall conference, we got to look at that division as well. You got the Green Bay Packers, led by Jordan Love, who's looking to have a bounce back season. You have the Vikings, who have probably a top 5 defense this year. Then you look at the Bears, who are going to be up and coming. They're not the most alarming out of the divisional foes out in the NFC North, but you can't count them out because they have played Detroit pretty tight the last couple of seasons. The Lions still have the personnel that have allowed them to regain prominence in the NFL. The main difference going into this season, however, is going to be the coordinator spots, both offensively and defensively. I'll talk about that and how I expect that to play out. Most importantly, I want to look at Jared Goff. Jared Goff has been a quarterback who I don't want to throw shade on because I do appreciate his time when he played for the Rams. He did help us ultimately reach a Super Bowl. But my concerns with Jared Goff is that he's a good regular season player, but when you need him to perform on the brightest stage, I feel there are times where he is lackluster or he's leaving a lot to be desired. Looking at the stats in the regular season, he has a 95.7 passer rating. And then in the postseason, it definitely takes a dip down as is at an 85.1. That shows you that Jared Goff isn't necessarily a high level performer. And we've seen that before because in the regular season last year, I think it was a Sunday night game against the Detroit Lions when he had the 5 interception game. Ultimately, the Lions were able to come back and win that game. But when you have that many turnovers and your plays lackluster in the postseason, it's difficult to come back because you're going up against far better talent. There's more stakes on the line, and you can't put yourself that far behind. That game against the Commanders, if you go back and look, there was a pick six that ultimately changed the whole dynamic of that game. So going into the 2025 season, can Jared Goff be more consistent in big time games? We've seen him be able to deliver and ultimately lead this team. I'm not saying that they have a quarterback problem in Detroit, but I am concerned about whether or not Jared Goff can be the guy to help the Lions get over the hump and deliver a championship for not only that city, but for the fan base. And that leads into the topic of the new offensive coordinator and John Morton. He's replacing Ben Johnson, who moved on and took the head coaching job for the Chicago Bears. The question for Morton is going to be whether or not he can continue to have this offense be an explosive unit and play Detroit football under Dan Campbell. We've seen their offensive identity be running the football. Will the running game still take priority, or are they going to get too glitz and glamour and move to a passing game? We'll see how that goes. I don't think you go out and hire a John Morton unless you have the understanding of the running game takes the utmost importance. I do expect there to be some growing pains to start the year. Not necessarily to the point where this offense is going to struggle. When you have a new OC, there's a bit of a learning curve. We'll see how that goes. We'll see if preseason training camp was enough to make that not as difficult for opening week in the first month of the season. My main concern is whether or not this offense is still going to be prolific, because in John Morton's lone experience as an offensive coordinator, it was with the Jets back in 2017, and they had one of the worst offensive units. I don't see that being the case in Detroit because you have the personnel. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be a talented running back. I think he's going to take a bigger leap this year compared to his first 2 years. Plus, you got David Montgomery, who's still going to get some goal line looks. Amon-Ra St. Brown, even though he's dealing with a knee injury, I expect him to contribute to this offense. J-Mo, I've talked about it with a lot of people. And then, of course, for fantasy football, which I'll probably have something out for you guys if you are interested in that. But J-Mo, I think he's going to get more looks in this offense because I believe they want him to be more involved. And then obviously Sam Laporta, and the list goes on and on. There's talented personnel throughout this offensive side of the roster. Moving on to the defensive side of the ball, I'm more concerned for that new coordinator and Kelvin Shepard. He was a linebacker coach last season for the Lions, former player. I'm not concerned about his coaching style. I think in that realm, he'll be okay because he already has coaching experience. Now, being a coordinator is a whole new ball game, but I think he will fare well in that regard. My main concern is whether or not he can maximize the personnel around him, because I believe that's what Aaron Glenn did throughout his tenure, especially the last 2 seasons with the Detroit Lions. And the Lions were plagued with injuries last year, so I don't think it's fair to critique them as being a bad defensive unit, because you also got to keep in mind that offense was so good that teams were forced to having to throw the ball a lot. So you're going to give up some big plays here and there. So that might inflate the stats. But I am concerned because I'm not sure if they added enough to their unit to make me go like, okay, I think this is a changed defense. I think we can see improved play. With that being said, the biggest move this offseason was getting Aiden Hutchinson back off of that broken fibula from last season. It was sad to see him get hurt because the injury was just devastating, but just what he means to that franchise in that city. Hutchinson is a good dude, and it was just sad to see Hutchinson be the first domino to fall in what was a ton last season on the defensive side of the ball. With that being said, I do expect there to be some growing pains for Hutchinson. I don't think it'll take him too long to get reacclimated to the game, but expect there to be probably a bit of a slow start for him. I say the first 5 or 6 games, because I believe their bye is week 8. So I believe that first half of the season, we might not see what we saw last season when in the first 5 games he had 7.5 sacks when the Lions went on to finish with 37 sacks. And speaking of that line, McNeil, he's still dealing with his injury from late last season. The reports are saying that he won't be back till about mid-season. So we'll see if any of their draft picks, or maybe they might go back into the free agency market to see if they can add more along that defensive line. I think that might be the play. We'll see how it goes there. I am curious because they didn't re-sign Zadarius Smith, which I was curious as to why they didn't. I'm not sure if that's because they were far away with money, because this is becoming a top-heavy roster a little bit. But when you go and acquire him at the trade deadline, I do expect there to be like the desire to keep him and build him alongside with Hutchinson. But again, money, cap, we'll see how that goes. We'll see how it plays out. I wouldn't be surprised if a reunion materialized at some point during this season. So big news in the linebacker core for the Detroit Lions is Alex Anzalone. He believes that he should be paid a little bit more as he feels his value is being underrated and underappreciated. We'll see how that materializes. As a fan, as someone a part of the media, you want to see these guys get paid, especially when they're good guys and they contribute on the field. And that's what Anzalone does. When he missed last season with that forearm injury, if I'm not mistaken, the Lions definitely missed him during that stretch. So I believe they'll get a deal done there because he's too important to this core and what they got building right now in Detroit. And lastly, to recap this defensive side of the ball, I'm looking at the secondary. We have Terrion Arnold, who was a first-round pick last year. He was relied upon heavily in his rookie season. I think he's going to only benefit from that happening because there was a lot of lessons for him to learn. He was one of the most penalized DBs last year in terms of holding penalties and PIs. I think that will allow him to learn, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a leap from him in his sophomore season. Brian Branch, Roll Tide. He is one of the most dynamic young safeties in the game. I expect him to continue to be one of those pivotal pieces for this Detroit Lions defense. And then most importantly, one of their big free agent gets, DJ Reed. And I know DJ Reed isn't a blowaway addition, but I think with his leadership, he can help uplift this defensive unit. Especially in the secondary, you got someone who is multi-talented. He can play in pass coverage. He can play and stopping the run. I think those are going to be critical pieces for allowing the Detroit Lions to improve on the defensive side of the ball for the 2025 season. And I almost forgot, Kirby Joseph. Even though I don't really care for him, I do think he's somewhat of a dirty player. Nonetheless, excluding my feelings, Kirby Joseph is another important piece for this unit. At the time when I was preparing for this video, he was dealing with some injuries. I'm not sure if he has returned yet to practice, but again, you want to make sure that he's healthy because he's another key piece for that secondary, as he was one of the league leaders in interceptions last season. Like I said at the top of this video, the Detroit Lions are one of the teams under the most pressure entering this season. And that's because their Super Bowl window is open, but you don't have too many bites at the apple. You have to capitalize at some point. And again, when you play in the NFC doesn't have that much talent. You only got probably maybe 3 to 4, maybe even 5 good teams, excluding the Lions. And a majority of those teams are in the NFC North. So there is a little bit of pressure now on the Lions to not only reach the NFC title game, in some ways they have to go out and win the whole thing. They got to go and reach the Super Bowl. Now, I'm not going to lie. Reaching the Super Bowl, I don't know if they'll win. It depends on who they match up. So my expectations for this team is NFC title game or bust. And I know that when I say that, most people might interpret that as, oh, you're saying like, oh, if they don't reach here, then you got to blow up the team. No, you don't have to blow up the team. But I think if you don't get to the title game again, or if you lay an egg again in the title game, then there's going to be some conversations about, okay, what needs to change, who needs to go, and who needs to be added to this roster. And the Detroit Lions are a team where there weren't many expectations, like 5 years ago. Now they're a team where we expect them to be good offensively. We expect their defense to be at least middle of the pack. And in an NFC that isn't that deep, they should be in the top 2, top 3 teams. The Super Bowl is still in reach, and you can tell with a lot of the personnel on this team, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, those were people who highlighted like, hey, we like that we're good, we like that we win games, but at some point we got to get over that hump. So we'll see what happens this season. Comment down below where you think the Lions will finish in the NFC. Do you think they win the NFC North despite it being a hella stacked division? Let me know. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next preview.